He thought it was just another cold patrol, until a tiny bobcat kitten limped out of the trees, staring straight at him. What it led him to changed everything. The wind was sharp that morning at the edge of the remote military base, tucked between two snowy ridgelines. The air smelled of frost and metal. Trees stood like silent sentinels beyond the wire fences, their branches heavy with snow. Everything was still. Corporal James Mercer pulled his collar up against the cold. His boots crunched over the frozen ground as he ended his dawn patrol. He liked mornings like this, quiet, no movement except the breath of the forest. Predictable. Clean. But then he heard something. A soft, high-pitched mewling. It didn't belong. He stopped. Turned toward the eastern perimeter. Nothing. Just the tall pines and the gray sky. Then it came again, faint, desperate. Not the wind. Not a bird. Something alive. His hand moved to the grip of his sidearm out of habit, eyes narrowing as he scanned the tree line. And there, almost hidden against the snow, he saw it. A small bobcat kitten. No bigger than a house cat. Its fur was matted with ice. Tiny paws half sunk in the snow. But its eyes, those wide, golden eyes, held him. It didn't run. It just stood there, shivering. Then, slowly, it turned and limped toward the forest. After a few steps, it stopped. Looked back at him. Waiting. James knew what he should do, report it. Ignore it. Move on. Wild animals came and went. Protocol said don't interfere. But something about that look, something raw and pleading, held him in place. He'd seen that look before. In the eyes of children during war. In the mirror after certain missions. Without another thought, he opened the gate. The cold air bit at his neck as he stepped out, rifle slung on his shoulder. The kitten didn't flee. It turned again and moved into the trees, limping but determined. James followed. They moved deeper into the woods. The ground dipped into a slope, and his boots slipped slightly on hidden ice. A frozen creek snaked through the trees ahead, its surface cracked in jagged veins. The bobcat kitten stopped on the far side and let out a sharp cry. That's when James saw her. A full-grown female bobcat. She was half buried in snow, her back leg caught in a rusted steel trap. Blood stained the snow beneath her, a dark contrast against the white. Her breathing was labored, mist fogging from her mouth in uneven bursts. Her eyes, so much like her kitten's, were not soft. They burned with pain and warning. As James stepped closer, she bared her teeth and growled low. A warning. A mother protecting what was hers. The kitten scampered to her, rubbing its small head against her side. She lifted her head and gave it a slow lick, weak but affectionate. Then she turned her gaze back to James. I'm not here to hurt you, he whispered, kneeling in the snow. His voice was low, calm, but his breath shook in the freezing air. He removed his gloves, pulling a multi-tool from his coat pocket. The trap was old, likely left behind by poachers or someone careless. Illegal on base land, but not unheard of in remote regions like this. As he approached, the mother bobcat growled again. The kitten hissed, sensing tension. James paused, holding one hand out, palm open. Easy. I've seen pain before. But I don't want to see yours. He moved slowly, carefully, fingers stiff with cold as he reached for the trap. The mechanism was tight, rusted, and cruel. It took all his strength to pry it open. As soon as it gave way, the mother tried to leap, but her leg gave out. She collapsed with a yowl, trembling from shock and blood loss. She wasn't going anywhere. The kitten curled up beside her again, pressing close for warmth. Without a word, James took off his heavy military jacket and gently draped it over the mother bobcat. She flinched but didn't resist. Maybe she understood. Or maybe she just didn't have the strength left to fight. James pulled out his radio. "Base, this is Corporal Mercer," he said, voice tight with urgency. "I need emergency wildlife medics out near Sector Echo 7. I've got an injured bobcat. Leg in a steel trap. She's non-aggressive. There's a kitten with her. Bring a transport crate. She won't survive long without help." The radio crackled. A long pause. Then, "Roger that, Corporal. Medics en route. ETA 15 minutes. He clipped the radio back and sank to the ground, jacket still covering the wounded animal. Snowflakes began to fall again, soft and slow, settling on her fur and his shoulders. The minutes passed like hours. James didn't move. He just sat in the silence, watching the kitten snuggle against its mother's side, watching the slow rise and fall of her breath. He didn't know why he felt what he felt. A tightening in his chest. A lump in his throat. Maybe it was because, for once, the thing in front of him wasn't an enemy. Wasn't someone to protect against. It was something helpless. Something that needed him. And for once, he could save it. When the wildlife rescue team arrived, they worked quickly and quietly. They sedated the mother bobcat, lifted her onto a stretcher, and placed the kitten in a separate padded carrier beside her. The kitten mewed sharply as they moved her, then quieted once it saw James nearby. He didn't speak much. Just gave them the coordinates, helped carry the gear, and watched as the truck pulled away through the trees. The snow fell harder now. But James stood there for a long time, watching the taillights disappear beyond the ridge. The forest felt different somehow. Alive in a way it hadn't before. Back at base, he filed a brief report. Skipped the emotional details. Just the facts. Injured animal. Unauthorized trap. Assistance rendered. But that night, as he sat in the mess hall staring into his coffee, he couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. Both the mother's, and the kitten's. A week passed. Then, a small envelope arrived for him at the front desk. From the Wildlife Center. Inside was a note. "She'll recover. Clean break, but she'll walk again. Kitten's in perfect health. We named her Hope. Thank you." There was a photo too. The mother, bandaged but alert, lying in a heated enclosure. The kitten curled beside her, asleep. James stared at the photo for a long time. Then he folded it neatly, slid it into his chest pocket, and stepped outside into the cold morning. He looked toward the trees again. Toward where it all began. Some cries, he thought, aren't just noise. They're pleas for mercy. And sometimes, someone answers. The following days returned to routine, patrol, reports, chow, sleep. But for Corporal James Mercer, something had shifted. His body went through the motions, but his thoughts remained in the forest. Every time he passed the eastern perimeter, his eyes drifted to the trees. He couldn't help it. His feet would slow. His breath would catch. He'd find himself waiting, for what, he wasn't sure. A sound? A movement? Another cry? The forest gave nothing back. Still, something inside him stayed restless. One evening, just before dusk, Sergeant Lowell spotted James standing at the fence again, arms crossed, watching the fading light stretch through the trees. "You hunting ghosts out here?" Lowell called from behind him. James shook his head, smiling faintly. "Just clearing my head." Lowell chuckled. "You're not the first soldier to get spooked by the woods. Something about silence that makes men go looking for meaning." James said nothing. But he wasn't spooked. He was connected. The next morning, a familiar voice came crackling over his comms. "Mercer, front desk. You've got mail again." Another envelope. This one had a picture inside. The mother bobcat was walking, limping slightly, but upright, inside a protected wildlife enclosure. The kitten was larger now. Healthy. Alert. They'd included a second note. She started eating again. Healing well. Hope follows her everywhere. You saved them both. If you're ever off duty, come visit. They remember you. James stared at the words for a long time. They remember you. Most people in his life forgot him as soon as he left a room. But an animal, a creature he'd known for barely an hour, remembered. It made him wonder, what did he remember? His thoughts drifted to things he rarely let surface: Afghanistan, Fallujah, the children behind the wire, the woman who'd begged him not to shoot, the boy who hadn't spoken a word but kept following him until the convoy rolled out. He remembered those eyes too. And he remembered doing nothing. Now, maybe, he had done something. That weekend, James put in a rare request for a half-day leave. It surprised everyone. The base rarely gave time off unless it was serious, but when the reason was filed, personal follow-up with wildlife medical team regarding base incident, the CO approved it without hesitation. James borrowed a base jeep and drove 2 hours through winding mountain roads until the forest opened into a flat plain dotted with low buildings and chain-link fences. The wildlife center was clean and quiet, nestled against a frozen lake. The receptionist looked up as he entered, smiled gently. "Corporal Mercer." He nodded. "They're expecting you. Follow me." She led him past kennels and recovery rooms until they reached a larger enclosure, glass-fronted, lined with straw and pine branches inside. A heat lamp glowed in one corner. The bobcat mother lay curled beneath it, eyes half open. She looked older now, wiser somehow. Hope, her kitten, was sprawled out beside her, belly up, little legs twitching as she slept. The moment James stepped closer, the mother's ears perked. Her head rose slowly. And then, her golden eyes met his. She didn't growl. Didn't move. Just stared. Hope woke a moment later, stretched, and followed her mother's gaze. She blinked up at James, then slowly padded over to the glass, pressing her tiny paws against it. James felt a knot rise in his throat. "They really do remember you," the vet whispered behind him. "She hasn't done that for anyone else." He crouched, face level with the glass, and placed his palm against it. The kitten pawed at the other side, as if trying to reach through. "How's her leg?" James asked quietly, watching the mother. "She won't ever run the same. But she'll walk. And she'll live. We're building a semi-wild enclosure for both of them. They'll have space to roam without predators or traps." James nodded. "Good." He stayed there a long time. He didn't speak again, and neither did the vet. The silence was enough. Sometimes the heart heals better in stillness. That night, as James drove back through the snowy mountain road, the moon hung low over the treetops. The sky was crystal clear, cold and perfect. He rolled the window down just enough to let the air in. As he drove past the turnoff to the base, he slowed. There, just before the trees swallowed the road, he stopped the jeep and stepped out. No flashlight. No rifle. Only moonlight and breath in the dark. He walked to the edge of the trees, boots crunching over frostbitten earth. And there, in a small clearing, he knelt beside a weathered stump. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the jerky he'd packed from lunch, and laid it gently on the stump. Then he stood. Waited. Watched the woods. Nothing came. But somehow, he didn't need it to. Back at the base, word began to spread about what James had done. Soldiers joked about him being the Bobcat Whisperer. Some gave him grief for going soft. But most didn't laugh too hard. Because even they had seen the photo now. The one taped inside the front hallway near the mess. The mother Bobcat and her kitten, eyes locked on the camera, wild and wary, but alive. And beneath it, just two words, hope endures. James never said much about that day in the woods. He didn't need to. Some things you carry quietly. Not because you're ashamed, but because they've carved too deep to speak aloud. He kept the original photo in his locker. And the note. And every now and then, when the wind howled through the ridgelines and the snow fell just right, he'd walk to the eastern fence again. Just to look. Just to remember. And sometimes, if the sky was quiet enough, and the trees stood still, he swore he could hear it. Not a bird. Not the wind. Something else. Something small. Something that once called out for help, and was answered. 3 months passed. Spring came late to the mountains, dragging its feet behind lingering snow. The trees budded slowly, and the creek near the eastern ridge flowed once more, icy, swift, and alive. But even as the land thawed, James found himself returning to the cold. Not on the outside. Inside. There were nights when he couldn't sleep. The barracks grew too quiet. The heater buzzed too loud. He'd close his eyes, only to open them minutes later, sweating, heart racing, reaching for a weapon that wasn't needed. He wasn't back in war. He was here. But war had a way of living inside you even after you left it behind. One night, after a long patrol in sleet and fog, James sat alone in the watchtower, staring at the forest beyond the fence. A soldier from Delta Squad had left a thermos of coffee on the ledge. James poured a cup, hands stiff from the cold. He stared at the trees, remembering the mother Bobcat's eyes. They hadn't been afraid. They had been fierce. Protective. Willing to die if it meant saving her child. That look, it haunted him. Because he'd seen it before. In another woman's face. A woman in a dusty village. Who had stood between her children and the barrel of a gun. Who hadn't made it. James hadn't pulled the trigger. But he hadn't stopped the man who did. And that guilt, it never left. Until now. Until hope. He didn't understand it fully, but helping that Bobcat, saving her from the trap, it had done something. Pulled something loose in him. Something heavy. And now, he needed to see her again. By mid-April, he got his chance. The Wildlife Center sent another message. This time it wasn't a photo. It was a request. Releasing the mother and Hope into protected reserve land tomorrow. You're welcome to be there. They should be free. James didn't hesitate. He requested transport clearance and was granted it. Even the CO nodded when James handed in the form. You've earned this, the officer said. Go. He arrived early the next morning. The forest was misty, dew hanging on branches like tiny pearls. The sky glowed a soft pink, and birds chirped with renewed energy. The world felt fresh. Cleansed. At the edge of the reserve, a group of vets and rangers stood by an open gate. Inside a sturdy crate, the mother bobcat crouched silently. Hope sat beside her, larger now, but still with the same wide golden eyes. James approached slowly. No uniform. Just a flannel shirt, jeans, and boots. He looked more like a hiker than a soldier. One of the rangers gestured. Would you like to open the gate? James hesitated. Then nodded. He crouched beside the crate, just like he had months before in the snow. The mother bobcat looked up at him. Not with fear. Not even with suspicion. With calm. Like she knew. He unlatched the crate. The door swung open. For a moment, neither animal moved. The forest was completely silent. Time seemed to pause. Then, slowly, the mother stepped out onto the grass. Her paws touched earth, and she paused, sniffing the air. Hope followed close behind. They didn't run. They walked. Deliberate. Proud. Free. They moved toward the trees. Past the brush. Past the last tall pine. Then they disappeared into the wild. James stood there long after they were gone. He didn't realize he was crying until one of the rangers handed him a napkin. They always remember the ones who helped them, she said softly. James wiped his face, laughed under his breath. I'll remember them too. That evening, James returned to base, something lighter in his chest. Not gone. But easier to carry. When he entered the barracks, he found a letter on his cot. No name on the envelope. Just a small drawing, a simple sketch of a bobcat paw print. Inside was a handwritten note. Sometimes, the strongest warriors are the ones who kneel. Who choose kindness instead of control. Who save without expecting thanks. You did what many wouldn't. And because of that, something wild still breathes today. There was no signature. But he didn't need one. He pinned it inside his locker, right beside the photo of Hope and her mother. And for the first time in years, James Mercer slept through the night. Weeks passed. Summer came. The forest grew thick and green, humming with life. James spent less time at the fence, more time training new recruits. He became someone younger soldiers looked up to, not just because of rank, but because of how he carried himself. Calm. Watchful. Steady. One evening, while leading a patrol along the eastern ridge, a private asked, "Sir, is it true that you saved a bobcat?" James glanced over, amused. "That's the story." The private nodded. "They say it came to you for help. Like, on purpose." James didn't answer right away. He looked toward the trees, where the sun dipped low, casting golden beams through the branches. Then he smiled. "She found me," he said. Not the other way around. That night, back in his bunk, James opened a new notebook. He hadn't written in a long time. But he began, slowly. There was a cry. Not from a person. Not from an enemy. From something small. Lost. Calling for help. And for once, I didn't turn away. He paused. Looked up at the ceiling. Then wrote again. And maybe, that's the moment I started to heal. Autumn came quietly. The leaves turned amber and gold, falling gently across the ridgeline like slow rain. The military base remained the same, routine, drills, the hum of engines, but something inside James Mercer had changed forever. He didn't walk the perimeter fence as often anymore, but when he did, it was with a strange peace. He didn't wait for movement in the trees or listen for cries in the wind. He just stood still. One weekend in late October, he received a final envelope from the Wildlife Center. Inside was no photo. Just a short update. We haven't seen them in a while. That's a good thing. It means they've made the forest their home. James folded the letter with care, placed it with the others in his drawer, and sat on the edge of his bunk. There was no fanfare, no big farewell. But he knew, this was the end of that chapter. He'd gone into those woods as a soldier, trained to follow orders, to assess threats. But he'd come out different. Not softer, not weaker. Just more whole. Not because he saved a life. But because a life, 2 lives, had trusted him enough to ask for help. And he had answered. Years later, long after his service ended, James returned to those mountains. Not in uniform, not for duty. Just a man with gray in his beard and a calmness in his stride. He hiked alone into the forest reserve. The stump was still there, weathered, moss-covered, forgotten by most. But James remembered. He placed a small strip of dried meat on the wood. Sat beside it. Waited. No movement came. No golden eyes in the shadows. But that was okay. He wasn't looking for them now. Because deep inside the trees, he knew they were out there. Wild. Alive. Free. And somewhere, in the silence of pine needles and wind, a memory stirred. A kitten's cry. A mother's stare. And the day a man chose mercy over indifference. James smiled. Then stood. And walked away, leaving something behind, just like before. Not for thanks. Not for closure. But because some bonds never need words. Only action. Only heart. And because sometimes, the smallest cries echo the loudest, long after the forest grows quiet again.